that feeling when you're staring at an absolute mountain of textbooks, a seemingly endless syllabus, or a digital folder bursting with PDFs, and you just feel this wave of pure, unadulterated panic? Well, you are absolutely not alone. Whether you're in medical school, pharmacy school, or tackling literally any high stakes, information dense program, the sheer volume of material can feel completely overwhelming. It's so easy to fall into the trap of thinking that the only way out is to just chain yourself to your desk for 10 hours straight. But in this explainer, we're going to look at what the science actually says about how our brains acquire and retain complex information.
Okay, let's dive into this because this quote right here, it completely changes the game. How students study is often more consequential than how long they study. This is a direct insight pulled from recent systematic reviews of medical student performance. See, academic dedication isn't just about the sheer number of hours you spend staring blankly at a screen. It's not an endurance sport, guys. It's a strategic exercise. If you're using the wrong strategy, those 10 grueling hours are giving you drastically diminishing returns.
To keep things organized and reduce our own cognitive load, here is our roadmap for this explainer. 1. The chasing hours myth. 2. The science of cognitive load. 3. Active recall and elaboration. 4. The spacing effect advantage. And 5. Controlling attention and time. Let's get right to it.
Section 1. The chasing hours myth. So, we've all been conditioned to believe that studying is just a metric of time, right? We brag about pulling all-nighters or spending the whole weekend locked in the library. But logging study hours is often a completely false metric. To put this into perspective, let's look at a real-world anecdote detailed in the pharmacy education literature. Let's consider the plight of a student we'll call PT. PT is a second-year pharmacy student taking a brutal academic load, including this massive 8-credit pharmacology and pathophysiology course. On top of that, PT is the vice president of a student association and works a 20-hour-a-week internship. Midway through the semester, PT is completely overwhelmed and totally falling behind. Sound familiar? This is the reality for so many students trying to just muscle their way through dense material by magically trying to find more hours in the day.
The core problem here is that PT is likely relying on chasing hours. This involves massed practice, which is just a fancy term for cramming, and passive reading, like mindlessly rereading notes or just highlighting text. It's exhausting and honestly highly inefficient. The evidence-based scientific approach, on the other hand, is all about controlling your attention. It relies on distributed practice, actively retrieving information from your brain, and working in highly focused short bursts.
Moving on to Section 2, Science of Cognitive Load. Why exactly does cramming fail us so miserably? Well, it comes down to cognitive load theory. Think of your brain like a computer with a very strict bandwidth limit for its working memory. You literally cannot force a gigabyte of data through a tiny megabyte connection all at once. When you sit down and stare at a textbook for 6 hours straight, you are severely overloading that biological bandwidth. The information just bounces off. Your brain just lacks the resources to process, comprehend, and store that avalanche of data. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this concept of deficient processing. Have you ever read the exact same paragraph 4 times and felt like, yep, I know it? Actually, scratch that. It's a completely false sense of security. Psychologically, when you mass information together like that, your brain literally stops paying attention. You become blind to the text because your brain thinks, oh, I've already seen this, even though it hasn't actually encoded a single thing into long-term memory.
Section 3. Active recall and elaboration.
So if cramming and passive reading overload our circuits, what on earth is the solution? We need to shift from passive review to active recall. Passive review is when the information is just right there in front of you. You read it, you highlight it, you recognize it. But here's the catch. Recognition is not retention. Active recall is putting the book away, taking out a blank sheet of paper, and forcing your brain to write down or explain everything you remember from scratch. It is a deliberate struggle. And when you combine that with elaborative interrogation, which is basically asking why and connecting the information together like a narrative story, you build incredibly strong, deep neural pathways. You aren't just memorizing random facts anymore. You're building a flexible network of real knowledge.
And the data backs this up beautifully. Just look at this forest plot from a recent systematic review. That diamond at the bottom represents the pooled effect size for structured learning strategies, things like active recall and spaced repetition. In the world of educational research, an effect size near 1.0 is considered absolutely massive. It unequivocally proves that actively engaging with the material drastically outperforms passive study methods.
Section 4. The spacing effect advantage.
If active recall is how we should study, we also really need to optimize when we study. Enter the spacing effect. This was first identified way back in 1885 by a guy named Hermann Ebbinghaus. The principle is incredibly simple but profound. You will encode far more information into your long-term memory if you space your study sessions out over days and weeks rather than trying to cram it all into one giant block. Why? Because of something called study phase retrieval theory. Every time you let a little time pass, you naturally start to forget. But when you force yourself to retrieve that information right as you're about to forget it, you elaborate on that memory trace, making it thicker, stronger, and way more permanent.
So the crucial point here is this staggering number, 259. In a massive scientific review of verbal recall tasks, researchers compared spaced practice to mass practice, aka cramming. Out of 271 cases, spaced practice outperformed cramming in 259 of them. That is an overwhelming consensus. Think about it. If you're cramming, you are actively choosing a method that literally fails almost 96% of the time in scientific trials. Crazy, right?
And we know for sure this isn't just an isolated finding in a single controlled lab. This map shows the global distribution of these studies, from the US and Canada to the Netherlands, Turkey, Pakistan, and Australia. Across vastly different cultures, different education systems, and rigorous medical and pharmacy programs, the cognitive science holds up. Spaced repetition and active recall universally enhance student achievement.
Finally, Section 5. Controlling attention and time.
You can't just know about active recall and the spacing effect. You have to organize your actual life to execute them. Here's your actionable roadmap to protect your cognitive load. Step 1. Schedule a specific time block. Don't just vaguely say, I'll study today. Say, I am going to study pharmacology from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Step 2. During that block, use the Pomodoro technique. Set a timer for 25 to 50 minutes of intense, unbroken focus, where you practice active recall and follow it up with a strict 5 to 10-minute break. Step 3. Regulate your mental fatigue. Those breaks, they aren't optional. They are completely required to let your brain's bandwidth reset so you can dive into the next short burst without burning out.
And this brilliantly illustrates how technology can actually automate this timing for us. Medical and pharmacy students everywhere have adopted digital spaced repetition tools like Anki. Anki uses adaptive algorithms to schedule your flashcards for you. It figures out the exact millisecond you are about to forget a concept and tests you right at that optimal moment. You can customize the cards, and some students even use a little Bluetooth remotes to rapid fire through their decks with incredible efficiency. Consistent use of these tools is continually linked to much higher scores on major standardized exams.
Now, this structured approach isn't just a handful of random study tips from some internet blog. This Prisma flow diagram right here represents the incredibly rigorous methodology researchers use to evaluate these very techniques. The academic consensus is crystal clear. Combining cognitive engagement, like active recall and elaborative interrogation, with strict time regulation is statistically proven to reduce your stress, prevent burnout, and drastically elevate both your GPA and your long-term retention.
So, as we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with a really vital question to ask yourself the very next time you sit down at your desk. Knowing the actual biological limits of your brain and seeing the undeniable scientific evidence behind active recall and the spacing effect, will you continue to exhaust yourself chasing hours, or are you finally ready to change your habits and start controlling your attention? The choice and your future success is entirely up to you.